Good evening, and welcome to our Tech Policy Lab Distinguished Speaker Series. My name is Tamara Lawson, and I'm the Tony Rimby Dean of the University of Washington School of Law. It is my honor and privilege to be here with you tonight. I want to tell you a little bit about our Tech Policy Lab, which I think is one of the most cutting-edge things in our country right now. And if you're watching the news at all, you know that I'm right about that, because we are in the news all week this week with our co-director being cited by NBC News just today. But this Tech Policy Lab is a collaboration. It is an interdisciplinary collaboration founded by faculty from the School of Law, the Information School, and the Paul Allen School of Computer Science and Engineering. And I would just like to applaud UW for that interdisciplinarity that we are so known for. This policy lab, as I said, is at the cutting edge. Its mission is to enhance technology policy through research, education, and thought leadership. Thought leadership. We are leading the nation in conversations and discussions around tech policy. And we are leading that conversation here on this campus. Part of how this policy lab works is they have weekly discussions at the law school, and we talk about these cutting-edge issues, and we allow the students to participate in research and part of publications and journals and other important papers, part of podcasts, part of news articles in the New York Times and beyond. And this is really important work. This is the type of work that is in Congress and at the top firms of technology. These are the places where our graduates hail after being so immersed and involved in the Tech Policy Lab. And I have to also tout that the Tech Policy Lab was named a leading social impact platform making a difference with digital potential by Forbes magazine. I would like to congratulate all the faculty, staff, and students from the Tech Policy Lab. This is like rock star status for Seattle, like Tech Policy Lab. Woo! Okay, now I want to introduce one of the co-directors, founding co-directors of the Tech Policy Lab, Professor Ryan Calo, who is the Lane Powell and D. Wayne Gettinger Professor of Law here at the University of Washington, both at the law school and at the information school. And he was one of the founding members of the Center for Informed Public. He is an authority on these emerging technology issues. Just today, as I mentioned, he was cited and interviewed by probably a dozen outlets, but you can Google his name and it comes up first at NBC. And these cases are cutting edge all the way to the Supreme Court, literally being discussed and pending. And even more amazing, our Ryan Calo is one of the top cited law professors in the country under 50 years old. Woohoo! Yeah. Without further ado, Professor Calo.
Thank you so much, Dean Lawson. Really appreciate you. Welcome to our community. You've only been here for what? How many days are we at?
46 days.
Hashtag 46 days, and already a transformative force at the law school and across the university and the community. So we're really, really lucky to have you, and we made a great choice. So, all right. So thank you so much for talking about the lab. This is, of course, our distinguished lecture. I do want to pause one moment and just acknowledge that this is a high holy day in the Jewish tradition, of course, Yom Kippur. And I'm disappointed at one level in ourselves for the timing being such that sundown has not yet occurred. But hopefully we'll be welcoming additional participants who are observant and are able to do that. But I just want to accept personal responsibility for that scheduling issue. That said, we are overwhelmed by all of you being able to be here and participate in this distinguished lecture, which is truly our flagship event. Danielle is a hard person to introduce for a number of different reasons. One of them is I almost always get a little emotional introducing her, but she's a person who doesn't really need much of an introduction because everybody here knows exactly who she is. But let me just say a little bit about my really, really good friend Danielle, Danielle Citron. So first of all, Danielle is one of the most influential scholars in the area of privacy and in cyber civil rights in the world, and truly. And she's somebody who has been working on these issues for decades. And for many years, she was like the lone person really in the academy who was sounding these warnings and delving into these issues. And whether it's like algorithmic accountability or cyber civil rights or certain aspects of privacy, she's been out there talking about these issues and being a resource. And yeah, the world has caught up to her, right? And so that's why in 2019 she was awarded a MacArthur Fellowship, a Genius Fellowship, and why today she is such an incredibly prominent figure, who, for example, has a TED Talk with 4 million views about deepfakes. She is presently a law professor. We're real proud of that fact. At the University of Virginia, at UVA, where she holds not only a UVA-wide chair, the Jefferson Foundation Research Chair, but also an endowed chair within the law school, the Chapman. She is the co-founder and vice president of an extremely prominent cyber civil rights initiative. I imagine you're going to talk about that a little bit, Danielle. But she's here to talk to us today about her new book, which I have right here. And there are going to be copies for sale through our partnership with Ada's Technical Books, which, by the way, if you don't know Ada's Technical Books in Capitol Hill, you need to go check that place out. It's one of the most beautiful spaces in Seattle, and it's a lovely, lovely place. And the book is The Fight for Privacy, Protecting Dignity, Identity, and Love in the Digital Age. And it has been, for example, excerpted just today in Wired, but it literally came out yesterday through Norton University, through Norton Press, and then as well through Penguin in the UK. And I don't know if I can't maybe make news about Japan. And has been optioned by a press in Japan as well. And so it's just been doing phenomenally, and we're so excited to hear from her. And so, with a personal debt of gratitude for being a great friend and mentor to me over the years, I'm so excited that you're here. So please join me in welcoming Danielle Citron.
This is what happens when your closest friend introduces you. That kind of amazing introduction. So thank you so much, everyone, for coming. It's such a thrill to be here. Right on the book was released yesterday, so I had the great joy of being with one of my very best friends, Ryan and Sue Glock from Microsoft. So it was like this joyous moment to be with my closest friends at the release of this, my second book, and I got to present my first book, Hate Crimes in Cyberspace, here as well. So I especially love you, Deb, and thank you so much, Dean Lawson, for having me, and for the Tech Policy Lab, for being so generous with me all these years, and for your mentorship. You say I mentored you, but you mentor me too. And I've been really lucky to have Professor Kalo as my dear colleague and dear friend. So I'm going to talk to you about intimate privacy. And what I'll do is sort of begin with a definition, and then make the case for, and hopefully I can convince some of you, that intimate privacy is a moral right. It's a human right, and it's a civil right that each and every one of us deserves. So what do I mean by the concept of intimate privacy? It's the extent to which others have information about and access to our bodies, our health, our innermost thoughts, which we document every second of the day with our cell phones, right? As we're reading and we're browsing and we're sending texts and messages. It concerns our sexual activities. It's our gender, our sexual orientation, and our closest relationships. So of course, every day, all day long, we walk around, we use all sorts of tools and services expecting, wanting, and deserving intimate privacy. Right? So when we go to a public bathroom or stay in a hotel guest room, we expect that no one is recording us there. And when we share intimate photos with loved ones, and when the tools and services that are ferrying those messages and storing those messages, we expect that both the companies and individuals are keeping those images, our intimate communications, confidential. And when we use all of those apps on our phones, right, our fitness, not only our fitness apps, but our phones, right, the health bands that we use, we talk to our Alexas in our kitchen, we expect and we're told and we're assured that these devices are good for us, that the people making them are on our side, right? They're going to make our lives better and richer. And all the while, we're expecting and we're deserving intimate privacy, right? So, when we, that expectation, though, unfortunately, is not often, respected. So when we, when someone shares a nude photo of us and posts it online, it's in violation of our expectations. When we search adult sites, and those adult sites share our searches and our video views with advertisers and marketers, which most adult sites do, with more than at least 7 companies, including data brokers, we're not expecting that information is going to be included in data broker dossiers and might jeopardize the interviews that we might be considered for or our life insurance premiums. Okay, so we're promised that these tools are on our side. They're going to make our lives better and richer. But we don't realize the other part of the bargain is that those tools and services are really being driven by, and we're paying for them with our intimate data. Okay, so why does intimate privacy matter, right? Why make such a fuss? Write a whole book about it. I'm going to talk a bit about why it matters for us, both for our ability to kind of develop who we are, for our sense of self-respect and social respect, and our ability to fall in love. So our first relationship, how we figure out who we are, of course, is with our bodies. It's kind of the first way we come to know ourselves. And we experiment with our identities, like figure out who we want to be now and who we want to become, is with our bodies. And it's not being alone. It's with other people, right? We welcome them in on the premise that they're going to keep our sharing discreet, right? And so also our ability to kind of make choices about who joins us sort of in the backstage with our bodies, with our most intimate communications and secrets and desires and fantasies. When we can make the choices around who we share that information with and who we can trust, we can enjoy a sense of self-respect, right? That our decisions are being respected. And crucially, when those decisions are respected, we can enjoy social esteem, right? So when we're seen as like a fully whole selves, right, we can sort of forge our reputations and be seen as whole people. But when our nude photos are posted online, we're just seen as a fragment. We become an object, right? We're sort of just a part of ourselves. We see ourselves not as subjects, as eyes, but as objects. And intimate privacy is, and I can't say it better than Charles Freed did so many years ago in a book called The Anatomy of Values, that privacy is the oxygen for love, right? How do we come to know other people? It's through our ability to become reciprocally vulnerable, right? We share our stories and ourselves, and over time, and it takes a while, right, with any of our closest relationships, right? But we unpeel ourselves as onions. So social psychologists call it reciprocal vulnerability. And trust is key to reciprocal vulnerability, right? We're only going to be down to share our innermost thoughts, our past lives, our activities, our hopes, our dreams, if we trust others to be discreet, to treat our intimate selves, our intimate sort of stories, right, as we hope, right, rather than as we dread. So intimate privacy is essential for identity development and human dignity, as well as the ability to fall in love and to love friends, right? Not just our people with whom we're in intimate relationships, but our closest of relationships. You know, what do they say, our chosen family. And so I want to describe a little bit, you know, in a lot of my work, I always think it's incredibly important for us to figure out what the stakes are, is by understanding people's experiences. And we can only really appreciate sort of what's at stake if we could understand the sort of people's stories behind some of the loss or violation of intimate privacy. So Joan was a newly minted lawyer. She was at her first deposition, and she traveled for that deposition and stayed in a hotel. And after those 3 days of taking that deposition, she returned home, and she got an email. And the sender was not a bad guy, too. And she clicked on the email, and what she saw was a link, and the body of the email said, "You're going to send me some more nude photos and a video of you masturbating, or I'm going to share these more widely." And she clicked on it because she had no idea what it was. It was a video that was posted to Pornhub, and the video embedded in it had her full name. I'm using a pseudonym, but it was her full name. And it was a video of her that had been taken in her hotel room, of her urinating and showering, like doing what you normally do in the bathroom, right? But on the expectation, of course, that no one was taping her. And so she called her law professor, who is a dear friend, and called me. And I talked to her because the person said, "You have 24 hours to respond with the images." So I said, "Absolutely not. You're not sharing anything." But I said, "We've got to hold our breath. Let's see what happens." And of course, within 24 hours, it passes. And the person had then mined her LinkedIn profile and all of her followers on LinkedIn, and so was able to then figure out all of her work colleagues and her friends from law school, anyone she had been in contact with. And so created an email listserv and sent an email from what looked like it was Joan sending it, and embedded the video, the link to the Pornhub site, right? And it looked like, so the email was sent as if Joan says, "Check this out, so like a fun adventure I'm on." And then the emailer writes to Joan again and said, "See," and he CCs her on a number of the emails, "You really want to share some nude images with me. Otherwise, this is going all over the internet." So she doesn't, of course, send any nude images, and the person makes good on the threat. It is then seeded on adult sites, adult finder sites. So those are sites that it looks like it's ads from Joan saying she's interested in anonymous sex and has rape fantasies, and it includes her home address, right? So she's inundated, both her cell phone and her email are inundated with, "I'm totally interested in hooking up," right? So, you know, her first reaction is, of course, to figure out where this thing is on all of these sites. She Googles her name, she finds, at least from a Google search, where it can be found on the internet. She goes to these sites, and this is a very labor-intensive task, but she goes to the sites and she says, "Will you please take this down?" Most of the sites don't respond to her. The only site besides Pornhub, which a few times takes down the video, every time they take it down, the person puts it back up, right? But the only site to actually respond to her email said, "I'll take it down if you share more news with me," right? Okay, so it is a project that's heartbreaking. And she knows, she goes into work at a big fancy law firm, and she goes to the partner she works principally for and says, like, "I know you got this email," and she has to explain what happens. And the person says, "I got your back, I understand," right? But as she explained to me as we sat together, she knows he's seen her naked. And she knows that every person she's ever gonna know in the future will Google her, and that's the first thing they're gonna see. Like, they'll have seen her naked, that all she is a body. And Joan's experience, like so many victims, I interviewed 60 people from around the world, Iceland, the United States, India, the US, UK, and Australia. And these themes again and again come up, which is the victims say that their life is like a never-ending struggle, right? That constantly checking Google to see what's next, that she felt like she had to physically change herself so she would be unrecognizable. And so for Joan, that was working out as much as she could so that she would be unrecognizable, so she got so incredibly thin. For other victims I talk to, they gain a lot of weight because you can't be recognized, right? And Joan, like so many victims, got a tattoo. And for her, it was her grandmother's name. And as she explained to me, it was like a way to reclaim her body. It was her body, right? It wasn't his, and it was nobody else's to see. At the time, she was dating a lovely person who was incredibly supportive. And they were supposed to get married. And they waited 3 years. Because as Joan said to me, there's no way I'm getting married and inviting people to an event when I feel like they've seen me naked. This is just like not, she just didn't feel capable of it. And she didn't trust her devices anymore, right? Anytime her phone got wonky, she would call me in a panic and say, he's hacked into my phone. I know something is wrong, right? It changed her, the way she moved through the world, right? Her sense of safety was gone. And that theme resonates for every person I interviewed, right? There are, and unfortunately, there's businesses, and I don't know if I can fix this weird sound that we're getting, but I hope it doesn't bother anybody, or I'll work on moving around so it doesn't. There are 9,500 sites whose raison d'etre is intimate image abuse, right? Most of them are hosted in the United States, right? Why? Because of a federal law, Section 230 of the Decency Act, passed in 1996, which provides an immunity for interactive computer services that host information provided by somebody else, so user-generated content. And that immunity applies to sites that encourage, that solicit, that profit from, and that keep up intimate image abuse. And so often, the operators of these sites are like, brazen, sue me. Right? And they often, when they talk to the press, will say, I can't tell you my name. It might risk my reputation. Right? Wouldn't that be just so lovely for all the mostly women and gay and sexual minorities that appear on these sites if they could have that opportunity, right, to claim some privacy for themselves? Okay, so that's the kind of one part of the story of spying Inc. or commercial surveillance of our intimate lives. Those are the scofflaws, right? But all of the apps and tools and all the services that we use, they are collecting intimate information about us, whether it's the adult sites that we visit, the apps that we use, are collecting the Alexas in our kitchens, the searches that we make. All of that, period tracking apps, dating apps, are collecting, using, and sharing our intimate information. They're selling it to advertisers and marketers, and in turn, they're selling it to data brokers. And who are data brokers? There are 10,000 of them in this country. They've got 10,000 data points on each and every one of us. And you might think, how am I that exciting? 10,000 data points, right? And those data points include, have we ever been a rape victim? Have we ever terminated a pregnancy or had a miscarriage? Have we ever bought sex toys? Do we visit, and how long do we spend on adult sites? So granular, detailed sort of view of our tastes, our appetites, our fantasies, our desires, when and how often we get our periods, right? And all of the procedures that we have gotten, including our assessments and scoring of the kinds of health diseases we think, and there are 100 data brokers that are devoted just to health, that rank and rate and score us based on our potential for certain diseases like type 1 diabetes or cancer, right? And our likelihood that we're going to someday spend some time in the hospital, right? And it's that data that then is used by third-party services to make decisions about whether we're hired, and the prices of the premiums of our life insurance, right? Okay. So that's the sort of some of the ways in which our intimate information is collected, is used, and is shared in ways that have very little to do, right, with our expectations, with our hopes, and, of course, and with what we deserve. And law, I always feel like I'm a lawyer and a law professor, and I always want to say, law has great potential here, right? It does, but right now, right, it's failing us. So let's just take the case of individual privacy violators. If you can figure out who your perpetrator is, and in about half the cases, it is a domestic abuser. Right? It's a former partner, it's someone we've pissed off, right? It's someone we know, right? The other half of the cases, like Joan, is a stranger, or we just don't know, we can't be sure. Let's say we assume we know and can figure out who they are, and we go to law enforcement. Unfortunately, the response is turn your computer off, boys will be boys, you can't make a big deal about it, and it'll go away, right? And it's sort of a combination of troubling social attitudes and a lack of training in the laws that we have on the ground that I'll talk a little bit about, that leads law enforcement basically to make, and I hate to say this, but every time a victim goes to, especially a state and local precinct, they feel worse when they leave than when they came in, right? And there are some cases in which it's police officers that extort, that not only exploit the intimate images showing to other officers, right, but have then extorted more images. So they become perpetrators, not often, but on a few occasions themselves. Okay, so what about civil law? You think, all right, we got tort claims, we have all sorts of like intentional infliction of emotional distress and public disclosure of private fact. We've got tort claims at the ready. And the difficult thing is that they can be helpful in theory, right? But as a practical matter, it's incredibly expensive to sue, and we just don't have enough like pro bono and low bono counsel. I feel like I have an amazing lawyer in the audience who the very first case I ever worked on, Colette Vogel, yes, I am talking about you, my friend, but who the very first person who had experienced non-consensual pornography was a woman in Hawaii, and she happened to have great lawyers, right? We had to change the law in Hawaii because she couldn't sue her abuser with a pseudonym. And the postings of her nude images weren't with her name, but with, of course, racial slurs. And one of the very first revenge porn sites called Private Voyeur. And we had to change the law in Hawaii to enable people like her, though not her, because that lawsuit was already like dismissed and dropped, so that she can sue under a pseudonym. So it can be really challenging to find lawyers who will represent you to sue perpetrators who have no money, right? There is no deep pocket, thanks to Section 230 of the Decency Act, right? Okay. So what about companies? You might say, all right, well, you can't sue the perpetrators, the wild scofflaws, right? But what about the Amazon, when there is a whistleblower story that Amazon Alexa has recorded people having sex or private conversations with their doctor? Why can't you sue Amazon? And the answer is we treat the collection, use, and sharing of intimate information as a consumer protection matter in the United States. So long as companies provide notice somewhere in their privacy policies, hidden somewhere in a website, right? And as long as they don't lie to us, they're good, right? There's some state laws that require some and have some thin-ish procedural protections, but it's really hard to go to each and every company that has your information, and it's almost impossible to go to the 10,000 data brokers if you live in a state like Colorado, Connecticut, California. We have a terrible law in Virginia and Utah, but if you can say, hey, delete my data, you gotta go to every company. Are you kidding? Does anyone read privacy policies in the room? Okay, I know there are a few of us because we're lawyers, and of course, right, and who have been great at, I feel like our Hincy friends, like great at drafting privacy policies, right? But we just don't have the time or capacity to go to each and every, if we lived in California, if we lived in Connecticut or Colorado, to say, please delete or don't share or sell our data. We just aren't capable of it. We just don't have that how much time in the day, right? So what do we ought to do? A first step, so this is the heart of the argument in the book, is that we have to change our thinking, right? That intimate privacy is it's a moral priority. It's a human right, and crucially, it's a civil right, or ought to be understood as such. So when we call something a civil right, it's a legal entitlement that each and every one of us needs for human flourishing, to feel like we belong, to really participate as citizens, right? We need intimate privacy to develop identities, to enjoy a sense of dignity, both within ourselves and for others to look at us as if we're sort of subjects and not objects. And we need intimate privacy to love other people, right? by calling something a civil right, and this is going back to the Civil Rights Act of 1866, like the earliest understandings of civil rights in the United States was protection against discrimination, invidious discrimination, but also for certain rights that all of us enjoy, right? Whether it's to work, to engage in contracts, right? To get an education, as Thomas Paine wrote, right? There's some rights that we're all entitled to. And I make the case in the book that so is intimate privacy, that each and every one of us deserves it. When you call something a civil right, it means that if you are going to violate that right, that you need a really good reason, right? In order to implicate those rights, you need a good reason. It's not good enough to say it's just for fun. So many people, when they're caught invading intimate privacy, so studies from Australia, New Zealand, and the United Kingdom that show when perpetrators are caught, I was just showing off to my friends, say 77% of the people. It's not for revenge. It's not because they're angry. They think it's cool, right? That's not good enough. And it's not good enough for companies to say, it's profits. Make things easy and efficient and more administrable. You need a good reason, right? And when you call something a civil right, the companies are powerful entities that have some control over our civil rights. They owe us duties. They're the stewards or caretakers of our rights. You know, think of schools and access to education, public transportation, right, and rights that we owe disabled individuals to be able to take and use transportation, right? When you have power over crucial civil rights, you owe individuals the right. You have to be the steward of that information, right? And that has implications both practically and sort of expressively. So what's the practical payoff? If your intimate information is a civil right that you enjoy, then the platforms that are selling and sharing, profiting from keeping up your intimate images without your permission, they're not acting as data stewards. They have no right to legal immunity. Right? They're the caretakers of our intimate images, not the exploiters, right? And for individuals, we deserve a comprehensive approach to intimate privacy. And for companies, it may mean that you cannot collect it unless your intimate data, unless you really need it to provide a product or service. And it absolutely means you cannot sell it. I don't care, sorry, end of story. You cannot sell it to a third party. Right? You owe us duties of care and loyalty and non-discrimination. And a civil rights approach has an important sort of expressive payoff. You know, law's our teacher, right? It helps shape how we think about ourselves and our obligations, and especially for victims, right? If you say, listen, your intimate privacy isn't a joke, it's not something to be just ignored, turn your computer off, but I see you, I see how you've been wronged. It matters, right? So victims, when in the very rare case where the Cyber Civil Rights Legal Project is a law firm K&L Gates represents, and bless David Bateman and Elisa D'Amico, partners at K&L Gates, who began a program of offering pro bono services, very rare. There are only two law firms in the country that do this. But Elisa D'Amico and Dave Bateman were able to get a judgment, a default judgment, in a case involving a perpetrator. It was very similar to Jones' case, but it was an ex. And the judgment was $6.7 million verdict. And, you know, the victim knew, you know, none of that was going to really be recoverable. But the judge, in writing that default judgment, could have just so signed this order. But he wrote an opinion, the judge, saying that the behavior at stake was the most wrongful, despicable behavior that he'd ever seen in all of his time on the federal bench. That it was so harmful and egregious that there needed to be a number here that made clear how wrongful that behavior was. And the victim explained to Elisa, who told me, that reading that was everything, because she could see that it wasn't a joke, right? That her harm was real and recognized. And it says a lot, of course, to companies and change how they behave in their own practices. If we see you as data stewards, right, what that might mean is that we've got to act like them, right? That even the designers of all these tools have to have people at the table who can understand the harm that's at issue. So ultimately, really, it's on each and every one of us. I know law is a blunt tool, and it's going to take a little while for it to catch up, though there has been certainly some progress. So in 2014, with my partner in all of this, Dr. Marianne Franks and I, we wrote an article called Criminalizing Revenge Porn, and at the time, there were only 2 states that criminalized the practice. We're at 2022. There are 48 states, DC and 2 territories. Sadly, they're just misdemeanors. They're woefully underenforced, but we made some progress, right? And it matters. We can build on and develop those laws. So I gave a talk the other day, and the lawmaker who I worked with in Maryland, the law came out kind of broken. I wasn't thrilled with it. It's both like underbroad and overbroad, and it's a misdemeanor. And so I was disappointed, right? It was the first bill that I worked on. And the lawmaker heard me basically say that on NPR, and he immediately dashed off an email to me, said, "I'm on it. You gonna help me? I know you moved to Virginia, but I'm still here." And I was like, "I got you, guy." Like, all right, the next time you're in session, right, in Annapolis. So, it's a project. It's a long project. And a lot of it is like us, And I wish I could say that it was just the United States, like we're the only ones with this problem. But having worked with the South Korea's digital sex crime commissioner and Australia's e-safety office, the UK's intimate image abuse, the problem in the US is a problem we export because the sites are hosted here, right? But it's the same problem in Singapore, it's the same problem in South Korea, it's the same problem in Australia and Israel. You name the country, South Africa, it's a problem, right? So it's a global effort that we have to work on. So I would love your questions. I feel like I'm like the downer whenever I give a talk. I'm like, I know this is no fun. But I hope there's some sort of way to look at this with some sense that we can do this because we've made some change, right? It's not everything. But the book does have a chapter where I talk about hope and change, some work that I did with when she was the Attorney General, our Vice President Kamala Harris, and some really important work we did with companies. It's an amazing story about and work we have been doing with South Korea, where women could not go to the bathroom in a public bathroom without worrying that they were going to be recorded. They would bring Molka kits, kits that are worth basically like $20, where you have silicones. You fill in the little cracks, little holes in the walls of public bathrooms. And pre-COVID, you'd wear a mask. And they've radically changed their approach. Women took to the streets in 2018 in Seoul, the first march where women and their allies held cards that said, "My life is not your porn." There were 25,000 women. 3 months later, the second march, this was in March of 2018, there were 45,000 women. The third march, this is wild, 75,000 people participated in this march against non-consensual taping in bathrooms. And in December 2018, it's really freezing, there were 150,000 people in the streets of Seoul. So they took action. And so we have some hopeful stories in the book about the kind of change whole change we can see, societal change. So I don't want to leave you with a sense that it's hopeless, right? We are the answer to all these problems. So thank you so much for coming. It's important to have you thinking about these issues and working on them and joining us at the Cyber Civil Rights Initiative to work on them together. So I'm excited for your questions.